In this episode of The Alternate Path, I got a chance to hang out with Dan Brockwell, one of the co-founders of Earlywork, a company that's helping young people build future-focused careers. We talked about how to scale intimacy for a community, how the team plans to allocate capital, and why mental well-being continues to be one of the more overlooked areas in our lives. I'm your host, David Kwan. Please enjoy my conversation with Dan. Dan, I think a really good place to start is that I want to congratulate you first for the 700,000 pre-seed led by SquarePeg, supported by Archangels, Phase 1, and a few other angels. So the first question I have for you is, given that has been the case, what does this mean for you, Jono, and Marina?
I think why it's so important to us is we're now flipping from, a side hustle on evenings and weekends to working full time for a problem that is, honestly, like the number one thing that I want to work on career-wise in the next 10 years. Like, I think for each of us, like that problem, like how do you help every young person or even every person find and build a meaningful career and make a positive dent on the planet? That to me is like such a wicked problem. And it's like a meta problem. It's like, because like you could get more people working on climate, you get more people working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like there are lots of pressing global challenges in terms of, ensuring kind of, more equitable outcomes for people. There's lots of transformational technologies emerging and changing the world very rapidly. And so the macro problem of like, okay, how do you help more people work on those and get involved in, careers in those spaces and understand what's out there is just like such an exciting opportunity. And I think, today looking at the landscape in Australia across kind of, university and early careers, there's a lot of gap really in the literacy around all these future focused careers. So this funding round for us is the chance to kind of really go full time with the runway that we can experiment long run in a patient, sustainable manner in order to find the best possible way to match awesome young talent to amazing future focused opportunities.
So I think what's really cool is that you kind of define the problem in terms of like what is the most important problem that you're going to tackle. It'll be really good to talk a little bit about like how you're hoping Earlywork will solve that problem. So then like the audience can just get some ideas in terms of like how does Earlywork actually work?
Yeah, how does Earlywork work? Let's do it. So yeah, I think when you think about the problem, right, like to me, they're like the single biggest gap today in kind of like, like helping, young people find awesome stuff to work on is honestly just the literacy around future focused careers. Like when you look at top students in the US, many of them are going to work, like tech companies or startups or even building their own things. When you look at top students in Australia, it's still very much this culture 5-10 years behind of, management consulting, investment banking, corporate law, yada, yada, yada. I think there's such an exciting opportunity now. The startup ecosystem is kind of becoming more popular here. There's such an exciting opportunity to educate young people about, okay, what does that look like? And how do you actually break in? So what are the companies? What are the roles? What are the pathways to breaking in? What are the skills needed? The problem, right, is, you've got universities that aren't necessarily well equipped to educate young people about all of those, more emerging paths. And so where Earlywork comes in is really through three key pillars. Number one, and this is how we began, essentially is a newsletter curating weekly free career resources on the careers of tomorrow. This is completely free, goes out to 4,500 young people across Australia and New Zealand. And essentially the goal is to try and capture untold stories about where the world of work is headed that have something that's directly actionable in terms of people's career choices, and probably something that also challenges maybe the conventional narrative of careers. So that's kind of really number one. At its core is content, and that over time will expand to short form content. Number two then is actually our community. So when you think about the biggest gap in education, you finish uni, you go into the workforce, maybe you're working at a startup and you're actually maybe the only young person or one of only a handful. Maybe you work at a traditional company and none of your friends are working in startups. I think by building a community like around, like, so we've got a Slack community of 2,500 young people across Australia and New Zealand, and they're co-learning, growing alongside each other, sharing career advice, asking questions. By building a social fabric between people who are interested in these spaces, you actually begin to level the playing field in helping more people, work in this sort of meaningful careers and high impact careers. And that's not gated by, you have to be part of a certain university, you have to be part of a certain company. So at its core, we're building this online next generation careers community to connect young people who are exploring these pathways. And I think the final thing, right, most tangibly, again, it comes back to, they've got to find the job, they've got to get the job. And it's all well and good. You create content, you create community, and people get closer and closer towards that. Where we start thinking about, like awesome talent and great companies is really our hiring platform. And this consists of two key components. Number one, we started off with a jobs board, essentially curating early career roles in tech startups and social impacts. And so, companies can post roles there for free. There's also premium listing options, but, that's a go-to place where young people can go, okay, here are some awesome early career roles where I might be able to work on some genuinely novel unsolved problems. The interesting bet then around the hiring platform is actually kind of the other side, which is our talent search engine. So essentially, we've curated this pool of people from our community, active and passive job seekers, university students and recent graduates looking for roles in tech, startups, and social impacts. And then companies pay a subscription to that pool. And then if they hire any successful candidates, pay a success fee. And so the thesis is almost like flipping the traditional job board model in order to actually improve matching success and help candidates land roles without applying, help companies not have to browse through like 500 applicants to like their listing, half of whom might be irrelevant. Instead, just being able to actually filter and see, okay, who's actually out there looking, what they look like, and then reaching out to the candidates that are already a strong fit.
Yeah, I think the monetization platform, like especially the hiring platform, sounds like really interesting. And we're gonna go off script a little bit, and I wanted to ask, the traditional job platform monetization model has been, I would say, pretty well built. Like there are multiple platforms out there. And my question is, how have you thought about, building a differentiating value proposition to make sure that the employers in the future stay with you, and also, I guess, the students are more likely to stay with you instead of going to multiple platforms?
Yeah, this is something that is like so fundamental to the core of Earlywork as a differentiator. Earlywork is not a hiring platform that happens to have a community. It's a community that happens to have a hiring platform. So when we talk about that single biggest differentiator between a lot of the traditional hiring platforms, it really comes down to community. We are providing a free content and a free community for thousands of young people across Australia and New Zealand. People are working on side projects together, finding co-founders together, going to free masterclasses together. And our thesis is that by building the strongest possible community, and by adding a ton of value upfront for free and not charging students a single dollar, we will build a really, really, strong and awesome pool of people that a lot of companies are going to want to hire from. And so the thesis over time is like, if we stay focused on giving as much value as we can to the community and creating an amazing community, we'll have this pool of people who, inevitably will be looking for jobs, over the next few years. Maybe they're looking now, maybe it's in 6 months' time. But one of the kind of core truths, so far as a capitalist system, is, I think people are going to be working for quite some time. So there'll always be kind of an appetite, for candidates to kind of go and find new roles. And if you look at then, the company side, obviously right now, the market for young talent is so fierce. And so I think what we're doing there as well is, unlike probably say like a traditional job listing, or like kind of if you go on LinkedIn, you might not be able to see what size of company is someone looking to work at, what sort of industry, are they actively or passively looking? Like 3/4 of job seekers are passively job seeking, and you may never see that just browsing through LinkedIn. They don't have, the big open to work banner or sticker. And so I think, early differentiation there, obviously aside from the community, is providing stronger insight into the passive job seeker preferences. I think over time, so we're working right now with a third party called Palette to kind of, roll out our talent search engine and job board. I think over time, there'll be some interesting explorations around that question of matching success. And I think there are a few hypotheses we have around, being able to match more strongly based on, personality fit and culture fit, being able to almost like leverage, say, like content that people create online as a resume. So kind of content portfolios. There's other really interesting plays around stuff like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and stronger analytics and insights there. So there are a lot of emerging trends we're seeing around, like Gen Z job seekers and how they're thinking about companies, evaluating companies. And so I think a really big focus for us over the coming months is actually doing a lot of product discovery work to think about long-term, how do we build like a custom hiring platform that matches talent in a way that hasn't been matched as effectively.
So it seems like there is a destination that you have in mind in terms of where you want Earlywork to go. There's also that period of time where you have to last long enough to eventually get there. And I assume that the capital that the investors are providing will hopefully bridge a big portion of that. So then to just add a little bit more color. So there's costs associated with producing content because it's time from you, time from potentially other people, so on and so forth. How have you thought about like creating better content in the future while maintaining a certain cost so that you can last long enough to actually get to at least some milestones for your vision in the future?
Great question on content. I think there are two key things that kind of come to mind here with how we thought about scaling content. And before I dive into those, like it's important to call out like content is something that you can build once and it scales to millions. It's almost like the OG code, right? You can write that's not a million. It's kind of just like there's this, fixed cost. Two things that we think about in terms of scaling our content. Number one is what we call our multiplayer approach to content. So like early on in the early work journey, we began to interview kind of young startup founders, showcase their stories. And increasingly what's happened is like through the community, we've been really lucky to curate an amazing pool of people with expertise and interest in very different areas. What that means is, a lot of people come to us being like, hey, I'd love to write a piece with you guys or, write a piece with maybe a couple other guests. And so increasingly what we do is, people reach out to me to kind of write a piece, or I'll reach out to people in the community. They might draft up a piece and then I'll kind of, work on that with them to kind of spar it, flesh it out, curate it, and then, be able to kind of send out like a really high quality newsletter from a really diverse pool of people every week. And so, yeah, I think like number one in terms of scaling content is like, it doesn't have to be, a single player game. How can you, if you're building a community-based business, how can you leverage the people around you to actually tell untold stories, shout out awesome people in the community, like showcase them and, tell people about them, but also consistently put out like really high quality content without like spending all your time on, like hours and hours and hours of like super deep research every single week. Number two then becomes, okay, now that you've made this newsletter, we've kind of got like this, I wouldn't quite call it maybe long form, but maybe like a mid form content piece, 1,500 words. That's a piece of content, but you can then start to repackage and distribute that across a shit ton of platforms. And so I think early on, we were just a newsletter and we were just sharing on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, okay, careers platform, makes sense, easy wins. Over time, what we've started to do and what you'll see more from Earlywork is repackaging like our mid-form content into short-form content, both text, video, and image-based across LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, testing out different channels. Essentially to go, okay, we've already done this work for like very little extra work. We can actually potentially get much more reach. And a fascinating anecdote here. This was like something that just blew my mind, right? Last year, we had like an article in the AFR. We had an appearance on TV. And kind of several months later, I went through to our Google Analytics. I was looking at our website and just trying to understand like, okay, like, where are people seeing us? Like, where have things spiked? I noticed there was this huge spike on one day. And I was like, oh, was that like the article? Nope. Was that the TV show? Nope. And I was like so confused. I was like, wait, where the hell did this like spike come from? And kind of realized, like, I think when we were like starting to research TikTok platform, like I just typed in Earlywork. Someone, I think based in Melbourne, had made a TikTok about Earlywork that had gotten something like, like 7,000 likes, like a super, super high number of likes. And we had no idea about it for several months. And that TikTok caused the #1 most visits ever on our site. And we didn't even realize. Probably, a lesson for us, side hustling, didn't have enough time to properly check analytics. I think now full time, a bit more rigorous. I think the point is there. It's like, there's a lot of opportunity to reach an audience that may not be kind of, reading Substacks and LinkedIn's, your more kind of like career oriented audience. Like when we think about empowering the long tail, I think Instagram and TikTok, like you can reach those audiences that may not actually be involved in the traditional startup ecosystem. So I think that, coming back to kind of your core question, like, how do you scale content and surely not like putting too much time into it? I think it's, get multiple people involved, it's a team effort, and ensure that you're squeezing the full juice out of this fruit that you've grown and, redistributing and repackaging across multiple platforms.
I think you'll be really happy to know that like, I think Google is in talks of like indexing TikTok content. So there should be potentially an organic prospect to that as well. And the same TikTok content could be potentially repurposed for YouTube Shorts. I think that'll be pretty fun.
Wow. We already repost for Instagram Reels, but to be honest, I haven't even looked at YouTube Shorts yet. Like I'd be interested to like understand the audience there, how it differs. I think there's a fascinating question as well, though. It's like, like we're a team of 3 right now. And so it's a question of like, okay, we could post on every single platform, but inevitably you have to like, as like a mental model, prioritize some more than others. Like not all platforms are going to give you equal returns in terms of marketing. And so you have to understand like for different platforms, like what you're getting out of them. Like LinkedIn for us, like as a distribution platform is like tier 1. Like on the company side and on the candidate side, it's a huge, huge win. You look at something like Twitter, and that's fantastic. Startup ecosystem partners. But to be honest, like when it comes to like candidate facing content, like, not that many young people in Australia are super, powerful Twitter users. I expect that to change over time. But, it might, startup ecosystem partners might be better to reach them on Twitter. Instagram might be like kind of the main place to reach, kind of young people who are like more passively interested in careers. And so, like, you can't do every single platform super well at the same time. So it's being mindful that, okay, we've got certain pieces of content. Where do we want to prioritize our energy and prioritize our experimentation?
I think that's a very fair point when it comes to like product channel fit in terms of whether like the value proposition actually matches the distribution channel. I think one of my key question was I wanted to understand a little bit in terms of how you allocate the capital that the investors have entrusted to you. I think you've answered a big portion of that, but I would love to know if there's any extra things or juicy things that you want to start hinting at so that we can get ready for it, like maybe a couple
Yeah.
months down the line.
Yeah, all right, for sure. So I think like, look, in terms of the funding that we raised, kind of around 700K, right? The bulk of that will be salary. So it's like salary for
Mm.
myself, John and Marina, like 3 co-founders, kind of, for like kind of that 18-month runway, so that we can focus on building the right thing rather than just like going super quickly and advertising something that's not, the best possible solution. We will start to hire. So stay tuned, probably actually in the next month. Did someone say community and marketing associate role? Maybe. You literally heard it here first.
I'll leave a link in the description box below.
Yeah. Link in the comments below. So yeah, I think like we'll start to hire. I think probably first person across community and marketing. I think that's like so core to our community in terms of like reaching more young people and helping more young people. I think over time as well, I alluded to this a bit earlier, but we'll start to look at kind of a custom platform around hiring. And so I would say probably in the second half of the year, I will start to evaluate potential engineering and design hires. Can't give too much detail there. I'm still in the product discovery phase, still pretty early. Maybe do some building in public while I'm at it. But I think that's the bulk of the funding really will go towards talent. In terms of other costs, I mean merch. You don't need 700K for merch. We do like an NFT collection where we actually like shout out people who like really contribute to the community, and we make like NFTs of them. People who like speak at events, people who have like been advisors to the community. But yeah, I think like really the bulk is around talent. Like at this point in time, like we're not using any paid marketing. I think with a community-based effort, we're really focused on organic growth, community referrals, affiliate partnerships with other ecosystem players, and content and community being kind of that double flywheel for the.
Yeah, I'm on a similar wavelength because we talked about this offline where for businesses who have immediate economics in terms of impact, there's like money in, money out. Like it makes a lot of sense to go with paid marketing, like doesn't hurt. But I really appreciate the fact that you guys are very focused on like the community side, the core value proposition and building a product. Because I think that makes you pretty scrappy and you explore opportunities that is either currently untouched or a chaotic environment where you can arbitrage that environment relatively well. And I think that's something that like not a lot of, I guess, companies talk enough about. We talk a lot about performance marketing side of things. And I think there's a time and place for it. And I think that Uke is like very good. We are very, very good at that. And I think it makes sense. At the same time, I just appreciate the fact that like you're looking at other things instead of like jumping straight into like performance and even though it may or may not make sense to you.
Yeah, I think like the 2 points there. I think number one, like in building a community, you actually don't want to build it and grow it as quickly as possible. Like you actually start to get context collapse, right? Like it's actually really important for a community that it's like, at the end of the day, it's a group of people who are building relationships with each other. So actually you don't want to like, just pump ads and get like 1,000 people joining every single day. Like then you actually like lose the soul and heart of the community. And so for us, actually, like we deliberately wouldn't want to do kind of like paid ads to get people joining that. What's much more important is relationship-based marketing. So working with student societies, even reaching out to students on LinkedIn cold. I'm big on the kind of the cold LinkedIn DMs. But I'd say that's kind of like a huge point in terms of, like we don't want to grow as quickly as possible. And yeah, I think kind of the other thing, just, further on the relationship-based marketing point, because a people-oriented community, I think what we're starting to think about in terms of marketing is ecosystem aggregators. Like we're trying to help, as many, like future-focused businesses as we can, and trying to help as many kind of, young people interested in kind of like these emerging careers as we can. So, at the university level, key partners to start to think about for us, and like where I'm starting to spend more time is, okay, university accelerators, careers departments, student societies, and then on kind of the company side, in terms of aggregators there, like you think about, okay, venture capital firms are aggregators of a lot of top future focused companies, accelerator programs, there are other awesome kind of community organizations. There are even partners, along kind of like, broadly like kind of the media and content space where we can team up, do content together. I might even appear on a YouTube video with a guy from Eucalyptus. There's a lot of cool opportunities to like team up with others in the ecosystem to get the word out in a more organic and human way.
I love the fact that you brought up the idea of like the whole soul of the community. And I think actually what I wanted to ask is have you nurture some of the potential ambassadors of Earlyworks, and how do you leverage those people to build distribution, like more kind of to reinforce your network in a way?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think that there's some early steps that we've done well here, but there's also, I think, some interesting growth opportunities that we haven't yet explored. So
Mm.
to maybe to set some context, like back when Early Work started, September 2020, it was a newsletter. It started with 10 mates. I pumped it across a bunch of, like Facebook groups for Unity discussion groups. I like DM'd like several hundred people on LinkedIn. I'm like, I'm starting a newsletter. Please subscribe to it.
Mm.
Like pretty shameless. But something that I learned from my time working with Tilt, which is a social payment startup that got acquired by Airbnb back in 2017, a really important thing I learned was like the power of white gloving your top 10% of users. So it's like
Mm.
whenever you're building a product early, and by product, I don't mean tech product, it could even be content, it could be an organization. Like find the people who are like, say giving you feedback on it or engaging or already sharing it with friends just because they're curious, they're interested. Find those people who love what you're doing most and get them in a group together and actually learn alongside them and create alongside them. I actually think like one of the trickiest things, one of the biggest obstacles in growing early work is this question of how do you scale intimacy? And I think, yeah, I know you talked a little bit about this before, but I think as a community grows bigger, it starts to feel less and less like kind of like this overall like really close like family, super tight knit. Like a lot of people you don't know in the community, maybe people from very different cities or very different role types. I think like there's two things that are really important to keep in mind. Like number one is being clear about our niche. So it's like we're not going after every single possible career. We're staying focused on tech, startups, and social impact because we believe those are the areas where there's an outsized chance to like work on really cool unsolved problems. Australia, New Zealand, we're staying focused on location, and I don't think we'll expand anytime soon. Though, like long run, we'd love to. And then I think in terms of age demographic, this is an important one, as in like we explicitly focused on early career talent. So university students, like up to the first 5 years of your career, and I think that's important because when people are at a similar life stage, they have more similar questions about their career. There's kind of more incentive to co-learn with each other. If you cast your net too broad, as in like someone who's like a 45-year-old like exec at a startup may not necessarily want to spend their time just hanging around a bunch of 20-year-olds. As in there's mentor opportunities, sure, but I think like being intentional about like those levers to create a niche, that's super important for creating intimacy. But the other thing, and I actually think like one of the biggest bets for us over the coming months is this idea of layer 2 community. So you think about like the early work community, like, and there is a core and opinionated thesis around helping young people like collaborate and work together on finding like really like big impact and positive careers. There's a core theme. So anyone coming to the work community, like there's like this unifying factor, and that gives it like a certain feel. But where I think the most intimate relationships are built and how you scale communities is creating smaller and smaller sub communities as you grow.
Yeah.
So right now the community is in like where we're just about to launch like an early women channel for like women in tech and startups. We're launching a founders channel. We've got a channel called Beehive, which is like a little channel for like writers who are like giving you feedback on pieces. Some early sub communities we've had success with are like we've got like a product community with monthly product manager meetups. We've got an investing community where they're doing like stock pitches and company pitches. As in, like, people don't want to feel like they're part of just like this one big forum. Like when I don't feel like, oh my god, I feel so deeply connected to like the Reddit community. But when I was like 14, if you told me like about like like r/soccer, as in okay, like I would go on that every single day. I'd be interacting with users there, creating content. People want to feel like they're a part of like a very specific group that is very aligned to a core interest of theirs. And so, yeah, like I think when you think about like roadblocks to scaling, the most important thing is like how do we create a scalable playbook for launching and selecting moderators for these sub communities within early work.
How do you think about like the subtopics that you want to chase after that ultimately contribute to the overall experience of early work and not stretch them too thin so then you break the network sooner than you expect?
Yeah, absolutely. As in like, at its core, like we are a community that's primarily careers focused. And so like a lot of the channels are obviously kind of, quite relevant to that. The three key categories like we tend to think about in terms of sub communities for like our broader future focused careers community. Number one is around role-based communities. So product, engineering, marketing, design, these are kind of core roles in a lot of kind of the emerging career paths. But for a lot of people, they want to know, okay, like, like what should I be? You might be trying to find a job in that area, or you might be trying to like grow your skills in that area. And so there's a lot of co-learning there. That's a very easy win. And those will be a key part of the community. Number two, I think, is then the interest-based communities. And I think specifically we look at like, okay, problem spaces that a lot of young people increasingly want to work on. So we thought about like we've done like polls in that like the questions channel in our community for like what sort of channels people want to see. We look at suggestions from community members, sustainability, crypto, education, health. even like science and deep tech. Like there's been early appetite from members around like particular industry spaces where they're like, wow, this is something that's like super cool, super emerging. I'd love to learn more. And so like crypto has been like in particular like a super successful one there, where there hasn't really been like an Australian crypto community for helping young people in their careers.
Yeah.
Then I think the final one, and this is actually really important, is even though we're building a digital community, right? Like Earlywork is a Slack workspace. I'm a super big believer in physical community. I'm actually I wouldn't go so far as to say anti-metaverse, but I'd say I'm a metaverse bear. I think like the best communities are physical. And I want to help people use the Earlywork community digitally as a tool to connect physically. And so that third component is actually location-based channels. So we've got like AU Perth, AU Sydney, AU Melbourne. And like one of the most amazing things to see in the community is, like the Perth channel is a great example where it's like none of the Earlywork founders are from Perth. We've like never lived there, but like without us even asking, they just started doing like early Perth meetups. They're like sending photos, doing like the Earlywork hand sign. It's like coming together because like, I think there was like a real need, especially during COVID, around like a sense of physical community for young people, particularly people who are kind of exploring this sort of area. To me, it's like, one of the biggest gaps we're solving for is honestly the community gap. Like, it's like when you leave university, it's like for a lot of young people, like, especially in an era where perhaps religion isn't as prominent in many people's lives, a lot of young people don't have kind of that core community group that they go to or the community group that they're a part of. Like, for many people, it's their company. It's like, okay, you work 5 days a week at this big tech company. That company can fire you. Is that? I don't know if that's like a sustainable foundation for a community. And don't get me wrong, like as in, like I think a lot of tech companies do like amazing things for the ecosystem. But I think it's actually important to have something that's free and not gated based on what company you work at, and not going to fire you, but just a long form unstructured community bound together by a shared sense of values, namely the notion that you in your career can work on something that has a big and positive impact.
Yeah, I think it's interesting hearing you talk more about the intricacies of building a community, and I think the problem that you're solving is also very similar to the team structuring problem as the team grows, because then you can no longer cater to, as you can't build this intimacy between the founders anymore, because then like you might have your engineering team or like your product team or your ops team. That's something that's quite interesting that I'm learning now in terms of like how do you drive leverage or impacts through a particular personnel that builds a more intimate environment that contributes to the overall mission that you're trying to do. So I thought it was nice that you brought that up, because I didn't really think that the team structuring, I thought the team structuring problem was more unique in the context of team building, but then again, it's like a community at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah, companies are like, in a sense, communities very much so, as in they have like a shared goal. They often have company values. They have rituals. They have a group of people. And for many people, that is like their primary community. But I think I think it's super important that it's like people don't become too dependent on their company.
Talking about physical experiences, I actually want to double click on that, because early home is another part of your hypothesis where I think it's better for you to explain it, and then like I want to dive a little deeper into that, because when I first read it, I was like, wow, okay, I want to know more.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Two distinct but interrelated hypotheses here. Number one, I think like as a founder, like especially for me starting off Earlywork, it was like really hard to, I think, build the confidence to go out there and create and test things and fail. And one thing that made it much more palatable and much more possible was actually being around other people who are creating. So I'd say, like when I started the Earlywork newsletter, I did that after seeing 3 other good friends all starting their own newsletters in very different areas. It made me go, oh, okay, this is a thing that people do, and it's okay if I'm starting off and it's like a little scrappy and it's not perfect. So I think there's a thesis there. It's like for founders and creators, in order to build the confidence to do that 0 to 1, co-learning is extremely powerful. And when you think about the richest form of that, I think like from seeing friends who spent a lot of time around each other, like building startups together, I started to form this hypothesis that like co-living could be almost like the ultimate form of co-learning. Like it's like if you're spending all your time, not all the time, obviously, but it's in like if you're living with other founders and creators, like that is almost like a 24/7 startup MBA. And one of my 10 core values is like you are the average of your 5 closest friends. Like and in that regard, like there's a call to surround yourself with people that you want to be more like, and people that hold kind of like values and behaviors that you want to cultivate. And so I think with Early Home, what we're trying to do is build essentially kind of like a group of hacker houses or creator homes for young founders and creators in Australia and New Zealand who are looking to kind of, like get something off the ground. Maybe they're a side hustler, maybe they're just starting on it full time, but people who are keen to like learn and live alongside other creators. So I think that's like a super, super like important thesis and one that's worth testing, right? Isn't like we're not like right now I'm not even charging anything like on top, isn't people paying rent like they would normally if you with a share house, but we're not charging any program costs. Like really the goal here is like for me personally as a founder, like to be able to learn from other founders is such a privilege. And then more importantly, it's actually like this test in physical community. It's an experiment to understand, okay, is this a model that, could be like really empowering for early founders?
Have you thought about like having programs visit to enrich the learning process, or is this more kind of?
Yeah, definitely. I think like we're still early in the thinking around it. I think like the first, if you think about like Early Home cohort 1, the first cohort will be building the plane while flying. So as in, I think with each of the founders who's moving in, like my goal really is to like, understand what they're building, and ensure that like, so that people can co-learn from each other, teach skills to each other, potentially do kind of like, rituals together where we're like sharing like progress updates. I don't think we've like, fully fleshed out. So like the house will be kicking off probably like end of April, early May, well, probably 2 houses. And so definitely I think like when people, it's not just like, oh, the startup founders happen to live together. I think what we'll start to see over time emerge is, okay, like these rituals for like, how do you actually build almost like an accountability group for young creators? You look at frameworks like, elephant groups, which is super, super powerful personal accountability. Like that's like one potential framework to explore. I think like I'm really excited about like this initiative in particular because it's actually a chance to experiment and learn, okay, like what are the things that, creators and founders would want most in terms of, like living around other creators and like how to best, make the most of each other's awesome skills and experiences.
I want to shift gears a little bit because as you talk about physical experiences, I think a common theme as I read Earlyworks work and also like content in general, especially your content and your YouTube channel, I think you talk a lot about mental well-being. And I think that I share similar sentiment, but of course we experience it very, very different ways. Go through very different experiences. Why do you think that mental health is one of those things that we have tend to neglect the most? Or maybe most is not the right phrase, but tend to neglect more compared to other areas of our life?
Yeah, this is such a good, it's a really interesting question. And it's one that's, quite personal to me. As in like, like when I was a grad at Atlassian working as a product manager, like I battled with like depression and anxiety, went through burnout, like, trying to do a side hustle while working full time. In terms of like why we don't, like pay enough attention to it or care enough about it, I think like traditionally a lot of it's been like social stigma. So it's like, like when you're growing up, like when I was going like primary school, like it wasn't something that was like talked about as much. High school started to emerge a little bit more, but I think there's a piece around like conversational stigma in terms of, media and content. And then there's like at a more granular level, the education around like how to access, like mental health, programs and resources and professionals that I don't think a lot of people necessarily have literacy around. Like I've had a friend once come to me and be like, dude, like, I don't know, like, where do you find a psychologist? I'm actually not sure. Like, that's crazy. I don't think it's deeply embedded enough in the education that students get in primary school and secondary school. And there's not enough content out there in terms of film, TV, media that's tackling it pretty openly. I'm very optimistic about it. Like, I think there's if you think about now on social media versus, like 10 years ago, there is so much more conversation about this sort of stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, I think like cultural change in terms of stigma and conversation takes time. Like having raw and vulnerable conversations about your mental health with friends and with family, like can be a confronting thing. And so there's a question of, like how do we improve not just like the literacy of like what's out there in terms of mental health and what resources there are, but also like actually like the skill of having conversations and being vulnerable.
Yeah, I think like culture plays a big part as well in terms of like just where you're from and like how the second order impact of our parents not being educated about this, where like I would find it very difficult to talk to my parents about like I don't quite know how to describe like the feeling to them other than I'm tired.
Yeah, and this is a fascinating thing. Like it actually brings to mind, I've got a friend, Andrew Vo, amazing guy, close friend from university and was also a product manager at Atlassian. He's currently building a community that's specifically looking at Asian mental health. And something that, like he experienced personally was it's like, yeah, like coming from, say, second generation migrant background, if you've had parents that didn't grow up in Australia, like even if we had like, say like a great education system around mental health in Australia, even if that was the case in primary and secondary schools, Australia is a country with people from all across the world. And so people might be coming from different parts of the world and then, like raising kids, and maybe they didn't get the chance to learn about, a lot of the kind of best practices in terms of like talking about mental health in a family context. And so it was kind of like luck of the draw. It's like, like some people are just born into certain households where there is more openness and more around talking about those sort of things. So it's a really interesting question, and I don't have a firm answer here, but like on the one hand, you need to solve it at like the education level, but on the other hand, it's even like just at a broader societal level for people coming from, say, different cultural backgrounds where perhaps it is more stigmatized. Like, how do you change that stigma? And I think the key thing there is like when you have mental health content and when you have mental health conversations in the media, in television, on social media, ensuring that you have diverse representation in how mental health is discussed. Like it shouldn't just be people kind of like kind of a more traditional Australian background, what you might expect to see on like a a TV show in the 50s, right? I think like mental health conversations in terms of ensuring that everyone gets the chance to unlock the power of stuff like that, you need like representation across the board from a range of different groups. But when I think back to like my journey, like battling with stuff like that, I think one probably mistake that I made early on was, I was like working on the side hustle, and like I was still, I was like struggling at work, wasn't really enjoying the stuff I was working on. But, like to make up for that, I was like trying to see like a lot of friends. And this has happened to me like after like losing like a close relative to suicide. And so I was in a situation where it's like, wow, okay, oh my God, like it's really important to like be around people, spend time with people, like that social energy is really important. But the trap you fall into there is like stuffing your calendar so full that you don't have time to like breathe and give yourself balance. And so that's probably like the biggest pattern I've seen, which I'm a little bit hesitant about. It's like, yes, it's good to, like, okay, like the basics of like, get outside, drink water, sleep 8 hours. I think like coming back to the basics is probably the most important thing. I think what actually helped for me was actually being more public about my mental health story. Like, and this can be a confronting thing. It's like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to everyone. But what I would say is like a general thumb is that like battling with mental health shouldn't have to be like a single player battle. And I think, if you have good friends who, you've been there for kind of, quite a while, like you shouldn't feel that like you're over, burdening them by like talking about those things. Obviously always like ask people for emotional consent, be like, hey, would you be like, I've just, like got some things in my mind, like, would you have the emotional capacity to talk about this sort of stuff? But, if they do, then absolutely. It's not, as in like, yes, like psychologists are super important, but I think also, those social connections and like being willing to be vulnerable and open there can be really, really powerful in terms of like learning from those around you and battling similar things.
Yeah. I think like the whole point around spending time by yourself and like working through some of the conversation in your head, that's also really interesting. That helped me out personally. But it might not work out for everyone, but I tend to be a person with a lot of chatter.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. It's like there's a balance of like, okay, there's spending time with friends and sparring stuff with friends and just, like getting stuff off your chest that can be really powerful. But sometimes like actually you need the space to think through things, like to actually question like your like sometimes like like negative self-beliefs or negative views and try and flip them around and be like, okay, is that really like, is that a fact? Is that actually something that's out there, or is that just like an opinion of mine?
And I'm really hoping that like we can have more conversations around that, because that seems to be, especially in migrant cultures, like it seems like it's like this, it's being labeled as like weak to work on your mental well-being sometimes, but the conversations is changing now, which is great. I think that's a really good way to wrap up our conversation. And the last question I have for you before we wrap up is, who is another person that you personally admire who have taken a different path compared to the traditional path, if you will, that I should talk to next on the channel?
Ooh, person who has taken a non-traditional path that you should talk to. Okay. I'll give two suggestions. Number one is going to be a little bit crazy. Would be Toby Ord, who is part of the like Applied Rationality Center at Oxford, essentially researching existential risk. He's built 80,000 Hours, which is like a free careers guide around like making high impact careers. Started the Giving What We Can charity, where people donate 10% of their income to charity. Like leading thinker around effective altruism. I wouldn't say I have like one idol or role model, but I think like what he's doing for the world, I think is an immensely positive thing. And the way that he's written so much content and built community around all of these ideas is, I think, terrific.
Awesome.
Someone else you should talk to, who's been a cool interviewee for the newsletter we've had not so long ago, Sanjana Nagesh, who does Brown Girl Gang, speaking to kind of your thoughts around like cultural attitudes, like, you know, stuff around like mental health. I think she'd be a really cool one to talk to around creating like more positive associations and identity for kind of like South Asian women, you know, particularly those living in countries where they may not be the majority, but like connecting people with their culture and actually celebrating that through social media, through community. Seems like something that'd be up your alley.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate our conversation. That was a masterclass in community.